Would you breathe with me, please? Take it in and let go. And again. And release. One more deep breath. And let go. Thank you all always for indulging me in the breathing together. It helps center me, but there's just something that happens when we breathe together, when we consciously breathe together. There's really a coming together when we do that. So thank you for that. So as I've been announcing for the past several weeks, today is our AGM right after service. And we actually have a theme for it this year. The theme is to report on what we did this past year, kind of where we currently are, and where we're going for the future. And needless to say, if you've been part of this center for any time, you know we did a lot last year. And like moving into this building was kind of our big thing. But we've been here now since August. So, I mean, it feels like home now, doesn't it? Yeah, do you love it? You love it? I love it too. So it's a super exciting time to be part of the Calgary Center for Spiritual Living. So I've been percolating on this idea all week long. Because, I come up with my plan of what I'm going to talk about, and then I just kind of let it steep for a while. So all week I've been thinking about this, been thinking about the AGM, I've been thinking about the theme, and I keep coming back to one of my all-time favorite Ernest Holmes quotes or sayings. I have many. You will hear me often say, oh, that's my favorite, but that's because I have a lot. But this one truly is one of my favorites. And it is, principle is not bound by precedent, and our good is not limited or conditioned by any good that has ever been manifest. We should confidently expect a greater good than we have ever experienced or than we have ever known of anyone experiencing. So I realize that's a lot of words. That's why we're going to break it down for you, because it really is one of my favorite things. So we're going to break it down so that we can understand how very relevant this topic is, particularly these days. So the first part that I often refer to, I use this a lot when I'm teaching, when I'm talking to people, and that is principle is not bound by precedent. Those are words we don't usually use, are they? So I'm going to explain them to you. The dictionary defines principle as a fundamental, primary, or general law or truth. So a principle is something that you can just absolutely stand for, that you can absolutely know is true. So when Dr. Holmes is talking about principle, and it's always principle with a capital P, which means one aspect of the divine. So when he refers to principle, he's talking about that untouchable, infallible, limitless, creative action of the universe, otherwise known very simply as the law of cause and effect. So that is a principle. You understand what I'm saying? It doesn't change. It's infallible. It is infallible. That's the principle. So then we look at the word precedent. You know, if you watch law shows, anybody else like law shows? Yeah, I know, I love them. And they always say, well, Your Honor, there's a precedent for this. Okay, so let me tell you what precedent stands for. And trust me, I'm not going to spend the whole time giving you a grammar lesson. I promise. Okay, all right. So precedent, an earlier event or action that is regarded as an example or guide to be considered in subsequent similar circumstances. Okay, so stick with me. When Dr. Holmes says that principle is not bound by precedent, he is saying that this limitless creative universe and this law of cause and effect, is not bound by what has gone before. In other words, just because something always was, doesn't mean it has to stay that way. And just because something never was, doesn't mean it can't become. You with me so far?
Yes.
With me so far. So, do you understand how empowering, how life-affirming this is? Because when we truly understand and we work with this idea of principle with a capital P, not being bound by precedent, then we can break free of the limited patterns and the limited beliefs that keep us stuck because we say it's always been this way. Or it's never been this way. This way we can open up to ideas. We can consciously work with this limitless creative energy to develop new and greater and more expansive life experiences. Because principle, or law, whatever you want to call it, it goes by many names, principle is not interested in what's gone before. It's not interested. It doesn't care. It's not limited by that. It does all of its work in this holy present moment. Principle does all its work in this holy present moment. And so it is in this present moment that we, as conscious co-creators with it, can direct the principle to create new ideas, to create new things. We can also direct it, and this is where we get a little bit stuck, we can also direct it through the power of our habitual thinking, of our old thinking, to keep things just the way they are by repeating patterns. Anybody here repeat patterns? Oh, God, not very many. You guys, you come up here. Because again, this law, this principle doesn't care. It is a law. It is as exact and infallible as the law of electricity, or the law of aerodynamics, or the law of gravity. Gravity doesn't sit around and say, you know what, I don't feel like working today, and so I'm just going to take a day off and we'd be flying all over the earth, right? Come on, that was a little bit fun. So this law that we are talking about is not bound by precedent, but we are. Sometimes. So let me give you a couple of historical examples that shows that principle is not bound by precedent, but that we sometimes believe it is. So, there was a time when everybody in the world, most people in the world, believed that the world was flat. Yes? They believed the generally accepted belief system was that if a ship went beyond the horizon, it was going to drop off the earth and it was going to drop into the mouth of a giant sea creature. Yes? As depicted here in this picture. People could not believe anything further than what their sense of sight was showing them, and all they could see was the horizon, right? So they believed that the earth was flat. For thousands of years, they believed that the earth was flat. But for whatever reason, this guy, Christopher Columbus, wait, you guys know about Christopher Columbus here in Canada? Yeah, every once in a while I'm like, wait, is that just a strictly American thing? Okay, so Christopher Columbus did... Lost all Canadian credibility. But you guys have different guys for your Thanksgiving, right? Yeah? You learned both. Oh, yeah, that's true. Martin Frobisher is your guy, right? Ah! Okay. See, I think people are like, who's Martin Frobisher? He's your guy. Okay, so Christopher Columbus, all right, didn't believe in principle being bound by precedent, right? So he proved it when he sailed across the ocean and discovered the Americas. Plural. But what is also true, and this is so interesting, is that several other cultures around the world did not have that as a precedent. The Vikings on one side of the world, the Polynesians on the other side of the world, traveled all over the ocean without the limitations. Principle is not bound by precedent. And some other more modern examples of beliefs include some beliefs around technology. I thought these were funny. Who the hell wants to hear actors talk? H.M. Warner Brothers, 1927. Television won't be able to hold on to any market it captures after the first 6 months. People will soon get tired of staring at a plywood box every night. Daryl Zanuck, executive of 20th Century Fox in 1946. I think there is a world market for maybe 5 computers. The chairman of IBM. And finally, there is no reason anybody would want a computer in their home. Ken Olsen, the president and chairman of DEC Corporation in 1977. So that just gives you an idea. Hey, I went to the internet, another fad, and I found all of these examples of short-sighted beliefs, of precedents. And yet, because we live in this universe that is ever expanding and always creating, not only do we have every one of these things and take them for granted, but every day something new, something different is making itself known. Principle is not bound by precedent. So interesting history lesson, grammar lesson. You're getting it all today. So it's fun to talk about and think about, but always, 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 we come back to, what does this mean to me? What does this mean to me? How can I apply this in my life to enhance the life that I'm living? Well, I named this talk Just As I Expected. That was the name of it. Because it is our limiting expectations that are often the precedent that keeps us stuck. For instance, let me see if this has ever happened. Come on, raise your hand once I do this. You really want something to happen in your life. And you treat about it, and you pray about it, and you wish for it, and you hope. But down deep, you don't really believe it's going to happen. And so when it doesn't happen, you say to yourself, well, it's just as I expected. Or how about this one? You don't want something to happen. But deep down, you're pretty sure it's going to happen. And when it does, you say to yourself, just as I expected. Absolutely. So even though there are different scenarios, either one is something, getting something and some not getting something, the creative process is the same thing. In each case, we are believing more in limitation than we are in possibility. And therefore, we get stuck in a precedent of our own limited thinking. And because principle or law is impartial, it doesn't choose, it doesn't edit, it simply produces what it is that we expect. So going back to our quote again with Ernest Holmes, principle not bound by precedent, our good is not limited or conditioned by any good that has ever been manifested, we should confidently expect a greater good than we have ever experienced or than we've ever known anyone experiencing. Confidently expect. The beauty of being in a teaching like this, like I said, I love us, is that we absolutely believe our teaching is based on the idea that our lives can be improved, they can be enhanced, they can be expanded, absolutely. We teach that this universe is forever expressing itself and expanding itself, and because we are part of it, then that too is our mandate, to live a life that is fully expressed. Happy, healthy, joyful, peaceful, loving. The challenge is that not too many of us were raised knowing this, were we? We're born knowing it, but we were not raised knowing it. We were raised, several months ago we talked about the 4 agreements. We were raised into limiting, contracting, negative agreements. Those become our expectations, which become our precedents, which the precedents then become our just as I expected limitations. You with me? Yeah. But, as Dr. Holmes says, I love this quote, I'm so happy we're learning from this one today, we should confidently expect a greater good than we have ever experienced. In other words, we should, with confidence, with reliability, use this powerful, creative imagination that every one of us has to expect a life that we want to live. Can I get an amen here? Yeah. So there are several tools that we all have. We all have these tools available to us to help us fire up our imagination so that we can give the law something new to work with. And I use that phrase, something new to work with, because in many of our cases, myself included, our precedents and our limitations are caused by habitual thinking, and that they are so ingrained that we keep repeating things over and over and over again. So the idea, the point here, is to develop a new thought, a new idea. Now, none of these tools that I'm going to talk about today are new. They're not new to any of us. Many of you have been around in this teaching longer than I have. But what I suggest is, why not try them again with a new frame of mind? Yes? Okay, so the first one, the first one is to visualize. Now, whether you're using a vision board, whether you're using a treasure map, a wish book, whether you're just using your strong imagination, because you all have an imagination. I love how Mary Morrissey puts this. When somebody says, I don't have an imagination, she says, oh, really? Just imagine your kid is 3 hours late getting home. Yes? We all have imagination. But there is something about having something visual to look at that provides mind something fresh to work with. So I've got just a brief little story to tell about this. I'm always into self-disclosure, so I'm going to have to self-disclose here something. I've always been what I call a woman of substance. I used to have more substance than I do now, believe it or not. But I've always been a woman of substance. So when I was a fairly new minister, and I was pretty big in those days, and one of my congregants was an artist, and he said, I'd like to do something for you. He says, I would like to take a photograph of you, and then I would like to paint you thin, or thinner. I'm like, sure, okay, yeah, whatever. Takes a picture of me. And he was a beautiful artist, and that's exactly what he did. He took this photograph and he painted me about, maybe half size, maybe not quite that, but definitely smaller, right? And he gave it to me, and I was like, oh, thanks so much. And I just stuck it on the wall of my home, and I never thought about it again. But it was always there. It was always there. Whenever I was doing something, it was in my office. I always saw it, always saw it, always saw it. Years later, I went on a healthy eating program. And I started releasing weight. And I released quite a bit of weight. And one day, I looked at myself in the mirror, and I caught that photograph in my eye. And I looked just like it. Visualize. Visualize. And that's not a plus, because I'm not quite as thin as I was back then. You know, this is my gig. Whatever. So use visualization. The second one is, folks, spiritual mind treatment. Most of you know spiritual mind treatment. If you don't, learn it. Take foundations class when it comes up. Take our classes. We always teach spiritual mind treatment or affirmative prayer. See a practitioner. There is something about having somebody else know something for us, or ourselves knowing something magical when you are using spiritual mind treatment, when you are using the tools of spirituality to implant into your subconscious mind a new idea, a different idea, one that is not bound by precedent. Yes?
Yes.
Okay. The next one is fun, and that is travel. Now, I realize for many people, the desire to travel is one of those things that you think to yourself, well, I can't afford it. That's your old paradigm, or your precedent. I don't have the money. I don't have a companion to travel with, blah, 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 blah. Okay? Yes, am I right?
Yeah.
I don't like airplanes.
You don't like airplanes. So, I would just like to remind you that people come from all over the world to visit our fair city, to go to those magnificent mountains that are only an hour away. A decade before I moved to Calgary, my sisters and I got on an airplane and flew up here to experience the Canadian Rockies. So when I tell you I can't travel the world yet, I get that. The truth is, you can still travel locally. Get out in nature. Do something, because there's something about traveling. There's something about getting out of our routine that expands the mind. Yes?
Yes.
Expands us to possibilities. So the next one you're already doing, and that is to hang out with like-minded people. We talked about this last week when we had our New Members Sunday. But you know what? Hanging out with people who see possibilities absolutely helps us to change our old habitual thinking and our limitations. And if you don't believe me, do an experiment this week. Anybody here have any negative people in your life? Anybody here have positive people in your life? I like that. So spend time with both. Spend some time with the negative person. Then spend some time with the positive person and notice how you feel after you've been with them. If you find yourself mired in inertia and limitation, or do you find yourself uplifted and considering possibilities? That's your answer right there. Surround yourself with like-minded people. Lots of opportunities here these days, between classes and workshops and book studies and discussion groups and all that stuff. Lots of opportunities to hang with like-minded people. And the final one, this is a true statement, folks. The final one is to look up. And I mean literally raise your gaze up. Everybody do it right now. Raise your, oh boy, except for to the lights. There is something that happens when you literally, physically look up that raises your vibration and invites visualization. Anybody who's ever studied anything about NLP or hypnosis knows that when you want to access a visual idea, you raise your eyes up. Yes? Yes, yes. It's like taking the blinders off. In fact, one of the reasons I like to use PowerPoint, I use it in classes and I also use it here on Sundays, is because it keeps your eyes up. It keeps your eyes and your minds raised and open because you're not looking down at a song sheet or a program. You got your eyes raised up so that you can see what is really out there in the world, just like that guy, have you heard of him, Christopher Columbus did. So whatever technique you decide to use, whether it's visualize or travel or use prayer, hang out with like-minded people, physically looking up, the point is to provide yourself with refurbished, in some cases, tools. Have them in your spiritual toolkit that keeps your minds open to possibilities, to expectations about growth and expansion and vitality and possibility. Because when we know that principle, which is active in our lives always, in all ways, principle is not bound by precedent, and we work in partnership with it, we can begin manifesting the things that we desire, and then when they happen, we can say with confidence, just as I expected. I love you, and so it is.